Welcome everyone to Textiles and Tea. Kathy is having a little bit of technical issues, so she is trying to get on. But until then, I'm Elizabeth Williamson, and I'm the Executive Director of HGA. Obviously, I was not expecting to be presenting today, but that's what we do here at HGA, is we just all step up and do what we have to do. So thank you for joining us for Textiles and Tea. Today's episode is generously sponsored by an anonymous donor who specifically wants to thank all of those whose lives have been touched by Kathy and her position with HGA. So thank you to our anonymous donor. We welcome all your questions, and we'll try to address as many as we can at the end of the program. Please submit your questions using the Q&A button, not the chat. Being that I'm doing multiple things today, really need it in the Q&A, because as much as we try to keep up with your chat, the questions can get lost there. So today we are having tea with Arturo Alonzo Sandoval. Arturo is a fiber artist whose experimental techniques and expressive interpretations have earned him an international reputation. Arturo is a retired professor of art at the University of Kentucky. His work is in the collections of the New York City Museum of Modern Art's Architecture and Design collection, as well as galleries and private collections through the United States and the world. Arturo is frequently featured in national journals, periodicals, books, and local television. Arturo celebrated 25 years as an artist and educator with retrospective exhibitions throughout Lexington and 8 consecutive exhibits in the spring of 1998. Welcome, Arturo. We are happy to have you here.
I'm grateful to be here, and I'm sorry Kathy is having difficulty.
We are too, but it happens. We make do. So we'll keep looking for her, and hopefully if she jumps on, we'll switch over, because I know she's really looking forward to interviewing you. So as always, we start with, what is your favorite tea?
Well, since I don't drink tea anymore, but my favorites when I did were orange flavored and mint, and of course chamomile.
And how did you get started in fiber?
Well, that's sort of a very long history, but I'll cut it short by saying that I began in 1965 when I saw Evangeline Montgomery weaving a large red piece of fabric on aluminum, the weaving studio at Cal State, LA. And I thought, oh, that looks very interesting. I'd like to try that. So I was at the time in the Naval Reserve, and So when I was getting into graduate school, I took a weaving course. And from that time on, weaving was very important to me, especially since after returning from Vietnam, when I could get back into the studio. So initially, that experience of observation, because I'm a visual artist, seeing what I loved, and then trying it out. And from the experimentations after my Vietnam experience, those experimentations led me to get an MA and then my MFA at Cranbrook Academy of Art.
So you have a family history of weaving, is that correct?
Yes, and I didn't know that until I was 40 years old. I was doing some genealogy work in New Mexico, and I was driving around the little villages from Taos, Truchas, Cordova, and Chimayo, and I knew that we were from Cordova. But as I got into the village of Truchas, which is north of my family village, it said Cordova Weaving Shop. So I parked my little VW and walked in, and I said, "You may not remember me, but I was called Butch as a baby." And they went, "Ike and Butch, we remember you. We love you. Come on in." And then for 2 weeks, I stayed with the Cordova family, helping to weave little placemats because they were weaving beautiful Mexican influenced feather design and inspired rugs, but I was not capable of doing that, so I was weaving little placemats. This was when I'm 40 years old, so you can imagine how thrilling it was for me to find out that the men on my father's mother's side, were all weavers, and I was a weaver.
I guess some things are just destined, aren't they?
Yes, I think maybe in my pre-existence, I was a weaver.
So you have had an interesting and varied work history. You were a designer for a lighting business, taught adult education in Japan while in the Navy, along with teaching at several colleges. What was it like to settle down at the University of Kentucky as a faculty member?
Well, when I got a letter from Ann Green, who was the head of fiber at the time, asking me to apply for the job, I told my wife, I said, "Well, I should apply for this." And once I got interviewed, believe it or not, there were 10 tornadoes the day before landing in Lexington. And I'm flying into the city and seeing all these thunderstorms. And they said, "The Lexington airport is closed. We have to drop you off in Cincinnati." So we took the bus from Cincinnati down. I got interviewed, and then I found out I was going to be the fiber teacher. And from then on, I thought it was a miracle that I was going to be a full-time teacher with a studio provided by the university and a 2-2 teaching class for fall and for spring at the time. Now, you may not know what 2-2 means, but it literally means 2 classes to teach in fall and 2 classes to teach in spring. And that's really very good for a young assistant professor to have been given that. But, settling uh, in terms of those benefits really made me very happy because I was able to continue doing my creative research. So 44 years later, I retired in 2017 with a lot of artwork created under the studios there in the Reynolds building and then in the new Bolivar Street building, the School of Art and Visual Studies, which opened in 2015.
That's amazing that you were at one university for such a long period of time. What were the positives and negatives of just staying at the University of Kentucky instead of perhaps, some people go to different universities. For you, what was the positives and negatives of staying there?
Well, let me just start with first. When I began teaching, I was at SIU Carbondale. Then I went to SIU Edwardsville. And so the positives, of course, at Edwardsville was that I started my own fiber program. But then the negatives was that I was giving too much exterior work beyond teaching to do, like the gallery director and other committee work. So when I got to Kentucky, I didn't have to be a gallery director. I only did committee work that I was assigned. It was something that was required, to be part of all the time. So the benefits of working at the University of Kentucky were, first of all, the wonderful studio space, even though it was an old warehouse building. And the students were much smarter than they were where I came from, because the entrance qualifications at SIUE and SIUEC weren't as rigid as they were at UK. So it was a different kind of student that I began to work with. And then, of course, provided me a student on the floor below where I taught was another benefit. It was 5,000 square feet. Now, who gets a 5,000 free studio as an assistant professor? Well, I was able to do that, and that was the main benefit. Now, the negatives, at which I'm sure most professors at the university level will agree with, was that there were too many committees, because sometimes as you get advanced, your new advancement from assistant to associate means that you have a different kind of committee that you are going to be on, representing the Department of Art. And then when you become a full professor, then there's another kind of committee that you get on, which this time is reviewing portfolios of faculty who are going up for advancement. And that's a lot of reading, but you have to do it as an associate or a full professor. And then another negative, of course, was that I never wanted to be an administrator, even though people told me, oh, please become the chairman. I said, no, I'm not going to become the chairman. So that was the last negative that I leapt over so that I could continue my creative experiences.
I will say, as executive director, when you are the administrator, you don't get to dabble in all the artistic stuff as much as you would like when you're doing programming.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
So Kathy was a student of yours at the university, and she said she remembered how resourceful you were. She said you would come into the studio with materials you found at a surplus store or an auction and invite the students to try the material. You even brought in a bed frame. She said you were ahead of your time by repurposing materials such as film or audio tape. And what attracted you to those materials?
Well, one of the things, being a graduate in the very first decade of the 70s, 1971, I was privy as a student from the 50s to the 60s to see what kind of materials fiber artists were using. And none of them were using anything that was more like what Jack Lenore Larson would call an element of interlacing material. Anything a half inch or and wider became what he called an interlacing material. So when I saw all of these materials in surplus, I thought, well, they're on rolls of spools, and there's battery cable, and there's laundry tag material, there's videotape, there's microfilm, 35 millimeters. So I'm going to ask the students to experiment with them. So when I brought them into the studio, the students, of course, felt forced to put them into the web of their weaving, because they didn't really like the material. So they did a little sampler, and then they went right back to natural materials to continue other processes and techniques that I was teaching for that sampler. So for me, the attraction became more after that, sorrowful moment when the students rejected them. I said, well, I'm going to use them in my studio and experiment with them. And I did. And I began sewing layers of them together as vertical and horizontal elements. And the rest is history. I became an interlacing quilt artist.
Well, obviously that experience stood out to Kathy after all these years. So I'm sure that the students that were in your class, that stuck with them.
Right. The wonderful thing about that bed frame is that I was wrapping it with electrical wire that was from the surplus department. And I finished it, and I said, oh my God, this thing is so stiff. It looks like a Pop-Tart. And so I got a sledgehammer, and I went hard on that bed frame and softened it you can soften a bed frame, but I made it look more dynamic. And that became the finished result of that piece.
We have an early work that Mandy's going to pull up for us now. And this early work shows how you incorporated these unusual materials such as microfilm, lurex, and mylar into your weaving. Where did the idea come from to use these fibers?
Well, in this work, this is a piece of 16 millimeter bank microfilm. And those of us who are my age will remember that when you went to the bank and had a check, they would photograph the front and the back, and then they would ask you to sign the back, and then they would give you your money. Well, all of these little images became very interesting to me because they reminded me of parked cars from an aerial view, like over LA. And then some of them reminded me of housing neighborhoods because as I was looking at the material, re-rolling it, because when I was given the material, it came in a big box in just lengths, the different lengths of the microfilm. I hand re-rolled it, and as I looked at this imagery, I began thinking, what will I do with it? So I made a 2 by 2 foot study, and the material then became, as I looked at it, I said, well, this looks like a cityscape. So I'm going to approach these pieces in that manner. So this first piece, I wanted to make a plaid by experimenting with the laundry tag material in the white areas and just the film and lurex and without the laundry tag in the other areas. And that's how the composition got completed. So it began to look like a textile, but it was made from recycled materials.
So during COVID, you created a work that's we're going to show that next, which using perforated vinyl and microfilm. Would you talk about how COVID impacted you and led to this work?
Okay, let me have a little drink of water. This piece was created because I felt during the COVID era that I needed to respond somehow to this tragedy and disaster. After I lost two artist friends, very close personal friends, I decided to go into the studio and do some research. I went to the Washington Post and I looked up the most, which cities had the most deaths from COVID at the time. 25 cities had popped up. And so as I considered what would I do with this? How do I make it more personal? How do I use the research to make it more, statistical and at the same time meaningful? I decided to take the shape of each city and use the flag that each city has within that shape, and then create digital images that I would then colorize on the computer and then colorize using the mylars that I had in my studio. So if you would show the detail, I could talk more about that process. Okay, here in the detail, as you see, the pardon me, the perforated mylar and the perforated vinyl come together in a unity. The dots show the mylar behind the perforated vinyl, and the imagery is a digital image on the perforated vinyl. And the two come together to form that colorful background. When I sliced all the images up in 2-inch strips, I was able then to weave regular microfilm, both vertically and horizontally, stitched and interlaced, so that as they became small images on the piece, they began to look like little apartments, like you would see in a tall high rise in a major city. So I thought the success of the piece became the fact that the microfilm became visually transferred in the process of reminding me as a viewer and the creator of places where each of these people in these large cities were confined. They could not leave the cities. We were told to stay in place. So the series title became COVID, Confined Cities. And the one that is in the image that you're looking at was New York City. That was the image of New York City in the larger view.
Wow, what a touching way to memorialize that moment and the ones you lost.
Yes, the impact was greater than I anticipated.
I can imagine. So the next series that we're gonna you have a series that represents computer motherboards. The
Yes.
layering of different materials such as perforated vinyl and mylar results in amazing color and shimmer. What led you to this theme in your series and to create the
Well,
series?
as an artist, I'm sure other artists can appreciate this thought. Once in a while, you get dry and you've just finished a large body of work. You feel you can't really do anything more to create that would add to that series. So you begin thinking, what is next for me in the context of where I would like to go? So I had been working on pieces about the millennium and outer space and cosmic imagery early on because at the time my art dealer Linda Schwartz uh, persuaded me to do more pieces in that manner. And a lot of those pieces sold. So those early millennium pieces were very successful. So as I began to think, well, what can I use these same materials for that I have in the studio? And I'm reflecting on a quote by the late Walter Nottingham, who said, a great designer will use a minimum of materials, but push the or stretch the body of work through that minimum use of those materials and continue to create. And so I said, well, I have all these surplus materials. How can I visualize them? So I got on the computer and I just decided I want to just try. And I typed in motherboard and all these images popped up. And I thought, well, these are very interesting images of what a motherboard looks like. So I'm going to now take several of these designs and replicate them. And so you're looking at a pink replication of what a large vertical motherboard looked like. And the coloration of the motherboard was not necessarily pink, but I chose to use my pink mylar as the main base and context for this work. This series came about because Nancy Crow invited me in a body of work with a group of her quilt makers who she wanted to create masterful works of people who continue to work with ideas in their art and they expand new ideas from their body of work and materials that they have explored. So I submitted my maquettes to her, and she says, "Oh no, those are too much like quilts. Do something different." And so then I basically subtracted the material that I had showed her by removing a lot of netting and other materials. And I just got back to the mylar and the microfilm. And then I used holographic tape to cut out circles and shapes that represent those highlighted areas, which are some form of electronic element on the motherboard that transmits material and energy on the motherboard itself. So basically, from being, like an artist would say, I'm dried up with ideas. I explored a new idea, and Nancy Crow forced me into subtracting materials to use a new approach, and her encouragement led me to this new body of work.
You often work in large sizes from 7 feet by 7 feet to 3 stories. How did you begin working in such a large format? Do you like working in large sizes, or was it just a requirement of doing a commission for a large space?
Well,
And this
when I was at, when I,
Louisville. Oh, we're seeing
well,
your desktop, Mandy. I think
yeah,
she's gonna
that,
pull up a work
yeah,
that's currently at the
yeah,
Louisville Water Company.
yeah. As soon as that, but I can talk. Uh, as a graduate student at Cranbrook, I had three mentors. Excuse me. The first mentor was Robert Kidd, who was my first fiber artist in residence at Cranbrook. I was his TA, and my second mentor was Richard DeVore, who was the ceramic artist in residence at Cranbrook. And then the third mentor was Gerhard Nodell, who was the final mentor as a fiber artist in residence at Cranbrook. Those three individuals gave me the encouragement, especially Richard DeVore, to work larger than my body. If I stretched my arms out, and they said, always make an artwork larger than how you can stretch your arms out. And I said, why is that? He says, because museum scale challenges the artist much harder because it requires more thought, it requires more endurance, more work in order to create an artwork that is 7 by 7 feet or larger. Now, the piece you're seeing is a commission piece. And I became the winner of this. Mainly, I felt because I covered most of the wall. A lot of the other artists who submitted work for that wall left a lot of the wall bare. When I did this, I thought, well, it's a water company. I'm going to use water, modules and create circles and like cells of water that are polluted, reflecting the Ohio River outside of Louisville. And so this is the first piece where I reversed spray painted strips of large units of transparent mylar, and then they got sewn with my rainbow microfilm and rainbow mylar, and then they got mounted to aluminum uh, flashing. So the aluminum flashing with a adhesive allowed me to then bend these units on the wall so that they cascaded similar to a waterfall. And so the piece is titled Big Fall because of that.
Wow. We've got another one of your large works, which is in Owensboro, Kentucky. The Owensboro, let me clarify, the Owensboro
Sure.
Kentucky Convention Center. It has a wonderful balance of positive and negative space, and the colors are intense. How did you design this work?
Well, this became a different form of visual study for me because it was so enormous when I visited the site. So I thought, I remember the waterfall I did, and I thought, well, I could reproduce a secondary version of that. But after walking around the site as it was being constructed, seeing the wall that I was assigned, I decided that I would use modulation to create the monumentality for this piece of work. Now, the blue and gold and bronze areas and copper areas, they all represent light reflections that are on the river behind the Owensboro. I believe it's the Green River behind the Owensboro Convention Center. But what I wanted to do, since I was working modularly, I wanted to have some dimension to the work itself. So in the studio, I got very large sheets of archive paper, acid-free paper, on which I then sewed elements of blue mylar and other colorations of mylar after I had spray painted down the middle with neon orange and neon yellow and neon blue and neon green horizontal patterns that would remind the viewer of the horizontal landscape, as well as the fact that they're reflecting the river and that the patterning represented a river movement. It wasn't just straight a grid, it became a more dynamic twill pattern movement, and where the wall became part of the design itself. So these elements were then screwed into the wall using studs, and then uh, uh, Phillips head screws so that they would not, when the doors opened, fly off. They were stabilized using those studs. And the bow allowed the patterning to reflect with the sunrise and sunset that comes through the building.
I was going to ask if this was actually a much bigger piece and it's woven, or if you just made it look like it was woven and appeared.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it appears woven, but it's definitely just mounted, each unit mounted to the wall. Opposite this piece on the other side, on the east wall, these same modules are put closer together in vertical and horizontal manner. So it reflects like just one area of the river itself. And they look more like a dimensional grid pattern, which is also very beautiful.
I can only imagine what it took to hang that, to get all of that just lined up right. I probably have too many holes in the wall.
Well, what's interesting is that we had to be on, of course, on those scissor lifts on a very big one. Excuse me again, my allergies. My assistant was afraid of the scissor lift. Now, this is like a 6'4" African American athlete. He was scared to death to get on it. So one of the construction men who was working on the building helped us install these because we were going so slow that we would not be able to finish this piece in a couple days that we had been given before the building was to be opened. So this construction man, literally, we held the piece up with vertical levels, horizontal and vertical, and he then screwed in the four corners for us. And that, with his expertise, allowed us to finish the piece on time.
Wow.
Yes, it was a wow moment for all of us because when you're 60 feet in the air, this little scissor device is wobbling.
Yeah. So you have stated that you moved from working on the loom to the wall when weaving your work. This image shows your work on the wall with the marquette next to it. Would you explain how and why you made this change?
Okay, well, when I was teaching weaving at SIU Edwardsville and I came to the University of Kentucky, I began teaching on the loom, and I continued teaching on the loom until my retirement. But what led me to, of course, working in the interlacing method was those industrial materials that were being, going to be thrown out. So I repurposed them. And the idea for this work, which is Divine Wisdom in my series called Creative Portals, and the little maquette next to it, I created all of these images, first of all, on a computer with my assistant, Ken Minter, who is a very smart, you know, Photoshop savvy digital guy. And he's also helping me in my studio run my pieces through my sewing machine. He made these images for me, and then I enlarged them at a digital monster color uh, industrial digital press, you might call it, where they have a 10-foot wide digital printing machine. And so I was able to create the backgrounds using my Mylar and cut holographic vinyl from Joanne Fabrics. And then once the maquette was finalized, I then applied the digital image on top of those backgrounds. And the digital image then on the large work is a cutout because I didn't want the background grid to come through the digital image. So I introduced a cutout of the same scale and glued it to the back and then stitched everything down. And all the circles are applique Joanne Fabrics cosplay or costume play materials. And I was very fortunate to find all of those other materials, because all I had were these vertical elements of Mylar and they were too small. So going to Joanne Fabrics, I was able to find a variety of different cosplay materials. And of course, the small maquette is created and then it's translated into the larger work. And that's in essence how I made those other commissions. I made small maquettes and then the boards of the commission people selected them. In this case, I made this creative body for myself. So I made these maquettes to a compositional arrangement that I would find pleasing before I made them larger. Because once you make something large, you have to commit yourself to it. And so that's in essence why I got off the loom, because I could work on the wall, see the full image at one time, not have to roll it up on the loom and then unroll it to see how much I have woven. And so I initially for myself thought I'm going to just be like a painter, but I'm going to be used interlacing to work on the wall of my finished pieces and then use little studies to create them first before I made the larger works.
Since we are talking about design, how do you design the texture versus the colors? Do you design one first and then the other?
Well, what's interesting when you use the word texture versus color, these pieces have texture, but they're like relief sculptures because the space in the weave is so minimal, but it is still there until I machine sew it down, and then those two layers are fused. So the texture can only be realized visually because it's reflecting so much light that there's texture because it comes off the surface in many different patterns as you walk in front of the piece itself. But if you're to run your hand over it, then you would actually feel the zigzag monofilament stitching that holds everything down. And the applique edges, you'd be able to feel them as well on each of those circles. So if whether it's a motherboard, we're working with vertical and horizontal, or these creative portals, there's always going to be a texture there, but it's literally sewn down and fused with monofilament thread. And that's one reason why I use monofilament is because I want the background to not look stitched, but to look like it's like a painting held down, that marvelous transparent material.
Many of your works have personal or political meanings, like the artwork Divine Will. You have said you are inspired by the Bible, and I'm going to get this wrong, but it's Urantia book,
Yeah,
Mary's
Urantia.
Urantia,
Urantia.
Urantia book, Mary's Message to the World by Annie Kirkwood, and the Hubble Telescope. That is an interesting combination. How are those reflected in this work?
Well, in the context, again, reflected in this piece is that the creative portal comes from the Bible, where it says under, I believe, in the first chapter of Genesis, that at the throne of God, there are seven spirits that reign at the throne of God. In Mary's message to the world, Jesus talks about those same spirits, but he names them. The first spirit is divine power. The second spirit, no, the first spirit is divine love, followed by divine light, then divine power, then divine will, then divine wisdom, then divine life, then divine order. Divine will, as you see here, I use the ant nebula from the Hubble telescope as the central image in that portal because ants do the will of the queen. They are only doing what the queen asked them to do, which is to feed her and to protect her. So their consciousness is in that context. But in the consciousness of the spiritual realm, doing the will of our Heavenly Father means you are disciplining yourself to sacrifice some worldly activities like coffee, tea, uh, maybe extramarital experiences, remaining faithful to your wife, being, you might say, praying daily, doing the will of the Father in that context. So that's how all of that reading reflects in this piece, which is titled Divine Will. And you can see in the reflective manner of how the lighting from my photographer hit the piece, that as the lighting hit the face of the work, you can feel the dimension in that central circle. Even though it's stitched down, you can still feel that it has volume. You can still feel the volumes in those other circles representing the other divine spirits. And of course, the interlaced background, because of the lighting and the changes, creates these different patterns as well in the work. So there's that texture visually. There's, again, the essence of my research from my readings into the piece. And the whole comes together as one element of my 7 pieces for my Creative Portal series.
We have 2 more images of your artwork, and these are more political in theme. The one on the left, which is about, Mandy's about to pull up for us here, has such an intense color like fire. And is the color symbolic for you?
Yes. In both of these pieces, the political element is completely different in the context of where my research came from. In the one on the left, that is the piece that was researched from when I began introducing my research from the Olympics, where terrorists attacked the Israeli athletes and killed several of them and took them as hostages. If you take a look at the eyes and the face at the top of this piece, that's a terrorist body, the main central form. And then the pinkish areas are elements of that body overlaid and flipped on itself. And then the Statue of Liberty and the nuclear bomb images, those are other elements that I added to this work because this series was called Lady Liberty, and it dealt with terrorism attacking New York City. Because previous pieces to this work were called Ground Zero, where I introduced my first terrorist images on a series related to the Nevada and New Mexico Ground Zero nuclear testing sites. So in this case, I began using photographs that I took of in the Statue of Liberty, the World Trade Center, and I merged them together in this work. And then this piece was accepted into Quilt National, and it became my very first Quilt National piece. On the right, I created studies for a commission for Jack Walsh, who is a monumental source of funding for many art quilters. He has a large art quilt collection up in Palmyra, New York, and he has been a patron to many artists, including myself. But this study represents a piece that I wanted to show him as one option for the piece for his collection titled Changes. Let's see. Uh, Things are about to change or changes in the times. The times are a changing. That was the theme. The times are a changing. So each artist that he commissioned created something with that theme in mind. For me, it was at the time the taking down of Confederate soldiers across the Southeast, across America, where these Confederate statues had been utilized in hometowns and celebrated. So by removing these statues, I then decided that I would use the Confederate flag on one side and the American flag on the right in a manner which is called the flag in distress, because the star field is on the bottom right. So I merged these images of these Confederate statues with these two flags, opposing flags from the Confederacy. And I, chose to show this as one option for Jack Walsh to select when he asked me to do a commission for the times they are a-changing.
Wow. Well, it looks like Kathy has made it.
Oh,
We're at
great.
the end. I know she was very excited to be on here with you. And Kathy, we are at the your last question that you normally ask. So I'm going to let you ask it.
Okay. Hi, Arturo. Cannot believe I have problems today. It's so wonderful to see you. So
Yes, and
tell us,
you're
what's next for you?
you're in your car. Okay.
Yeah,
What is
I drove
what
around
is
long enough to find internet.
okay, good. What is next for me is behind me on my wall. As you can see, let me just tilt this camera a little bit. There's another maquette on the wall. And if I move my head down, you can see these cutout areas, which are
Wow.
cut out drawings, which would represent the back, the leaded elements of a stained glass window. So the one on the right is divine light, the one on the left is divine order. And you can see a little bit, let me just move it up. There's the two maquettes. As you can see, the colorations that I'm using.
Yeah.
So you're right, I am using the same portal images from my Creative Portal series as backing for these fake stained glass pieces that I will then sew fabric. The fabric that you see is going to be similar to this holographic fabric on the wall. Now, let me just turn on my other lights, and you can see the holographic coloration that is going to be that stained glass leading.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
You know? So here's the rest of the studio if the audience would like to see where I'm working. And you
Oh
can
my
see
gosh, look
me,
at that.
that beautiful armoire. So let me get back to this. So that's my next project. But right now, my work tables are filled with tax papers.
I'm sorry.
Mhm.
Well, I think we have some questions. Now I'm doing
Good.
this on my phone, so we'll see if I actually do questions. Um, Michaela McIntosh, and again, if I ask you a question you've already answered since I didn't hear the program, just let me know.
Sure.
Did you secure the Mylar to the aluminum, or was it a separate background like a ground cloth? Does that make sense?
You broke up. You broke up in the first part of the question. Are you saying is the
Oh,
Mylar a whole cloth background or what?
yeah,
Can you
yeah.
repeat?
And did you secure it to the
Oh,
aluminum?
oh, on that large work, yes. The all of the elements with the transparent Mylar with the painted circles on them that were then sewn and backed with the rainbow Mylar. Once that was all stitched onto this paper backing. Everything was stitched to strips of paper. Once that was stripped, I could then adhere it to the aluminum background. Those vertical elements were all used with an adhesive to the aluminum. And that way I was able to keep the Mylar in place, because otherwise it would not have the stability or longevity if it were just paper and Mylar. It had to have a metal background to stabilize it and make it more permanent.
Oh, okay. Okay. April Price wants to know, do you thread the monofilament through your sewing machine? And
Yes.
so how, and does it? Oh,
The monofilament, it sews pretty much just like polyester or cotton thread, except you just have to adjust your tension. I sew on Singer industrial sewing machines. So they're very different from the Singer regular sewing machine that I used to have. But the industrial sewing machines have a different tension device on it. And once that adjustment is made, and you know how you look at the back of the fabric to make sure that everything is adjusted correctly. I use zigzag stitches primarily because if I use straight stitches, it would perforate the material and it would tear apart. So zigzag stitches are used. So it's just a matter of balancing your tension on the tension bar.
okay. Yeah, when I saw your sewing machine, I didn't realize they made industrial. Singer made industrial.
Yes,
Is it,
I'm
how old
looking
is
right.
it?
I bought these in 1994.
Oh, okay. Well, it's newer than I thought it would be.
Oh yeah, in
All right.
fact, they still make them.
Really
Yes.
shows you how much I know about sewing machines.
If you want to work with,
How,
if you want to use industrial materials, you really need to use leather point needles and industrial sewing machines so that you don't keep breaking needles and your gears in your regular sewing machines. They're just too thick.
yeah, yeah. Well, Bernadette Benz wants to know, I guess y'all were talking, I don't know if you were talking about this, about your novelty fabrics now that Joanne is closing. Were you talking
Right.
earlier about your
Yes.
fabric?
Yes, I was.
Okay, so will that be a problem that
Well, it wasn't really a problem. I went to Joann's and I just spent $1,700 on some more materials and a lot of backing fabric. I have to have backing
Oh,
materials for my pieces. So whatever they had as cosplay, reflective, holographic materials, I purchased, but I purchased mainly backing fabrics for my upcoming pieces. $1,700.
they love you.
Yeah,
Karen LeBlanc wants to know, can you talk more about your design process for public art installations?
sure.
Um,
Sure, I'll do that. When approached by the gallery or the individual who is working with the corporation, the main thing is I always feel that you have to see the site first, and once you see the site, then you go back into the studio and you create, for me, a minimum of 3 different designs for that space. Now, I do that because I want to have my creative control over the design. If I were to just do one design, I could, come to the corporation board and commission board, and they would say, well, we don't like it. But by producing at least 3 different designs for that space, their mindset is changed from like dislike to choice. They have an opportunity to see how I am viewing the site in 3 different ways, and then they have a choice to pick the one that they like. That's basically my design selection. And when it comes to the site, you have to just get the parameters of the site. You have to get the limitations of the site. You have to get what materials the site would, incorporate. And let me share with you, I was one of the runners up for a site in San Jose for a fire station. When I presented my designs, one person asked, "Are they earthquake proof?" And I had never thought about earthquake proof in planning my designs. So when I saw the site, I never thought about earthquake proof because all my designs were literally on the building versus the person who won the design incorporated as walls of the building. So my pieces would have probably fallen off and caused the fire trucks some problems. So I didn't get that commission. But on other commissions, as I said, that I have won, I do select 3 different motifs so that they can choose. Anything else? Kathy, are you still there?
She's muted at the moment. She had, I think, an internet connection issue. Kathy, are you there with us? You need to unmute.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Well, Arturo, I'm so glad that we had 45 minutes to an hour together, but now we need to stop. And I am so sorry. And y'all, the part of the problem is that when we have our rehearsal, I ask the artist not to answer the question. It just, leaves it a little more fresh. But now I don't
Yes.
have the answer. So now I'm going to have to go back and watch and see how Arturo answered my questions. Arturo, it means so much to me that you are on here today. I owe all of my weaving to you and your class so much for being on here. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the fact that when I was in Atlanta, you remembered me.
Oh my gosh. Who could have forgotten Arturo Sandoval? I used to tell everybody I got into fiber because the teacher was teaching fiber. When we were there, we looked around and went, Arturo's cool. We want to take his class. And that's how I got into it. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you to HGA
Y'all,
as
I
well.
encourage you. Oh, absolutely. I encourage y'all to go to the website and learn more about what's doing and where he's presenting. And you have an exhibit going on right now in
Moorhead,
Eastern
Kentucky.
Kentucky.
Yeah, the Folk Arts
Moorhead.
Center.
Oh, gotta keep that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Moorhead Folk Arts Center.
Yes. Well, thanks again, Kathy.
Thank you, Arturo. Kathy has frozen, so I'm going to step in
Okay.
here. And I would like to, again, thank you for being with us today. That means so much to us, and I know it meant a lot to Kathy. And if, as a special thanks to our sponsor who donated in honor of Kathy and all of those whom she's touched. I know, it's been about 220 episodes of Textiles and of Tea, and Kathy has hosted almost all of them. I think all but about 10. So thank you for sponsoring this episode. That was so special to her. We'd also like to say, if you'd like to sponsor an episode of Textiles and Tea, you can do so on our website at weavespindye.org. And then, Mandy, go ahead and go back over there to that Fiberathon. On Thursday, we are having our very first Fiberathon. Think of it like a telethon, only it's going to be on Zoom, and you can access it through our website. It's actually under programs, or you'll look for the Fiberathon. We'll put the link here in the chat for you as well. It'll also be live on Zoom. And about every 10 minutes, we're going to have a different presenter speaking about fiber. And this is really a fundraiser to raise money for HGA. We're a little short on our funds this year, so we actually wrap up our fiscal year on March 31st. So we came up with this idea, and it's going to be 12 hours of fiber content, and it will be recorded. So if you miss it, you can always catch it at your convenience, but pop in throughout the day, see how we're doing at raising money, perhaps donate. We still have a couple presenter slots open, I think about 8 slots. So if you are interested in being a presenter, we would encourage you to do so. And as always, if you missed a part of this episode, like Kathy did, and would like to view it, you can do so on our Facebook page. It's because this is recorded. It's available on Facebook for about 30 days. Facebook has changed their policy, so it'll only be on Facebook for 30 days, but don't worry, we will add it to our YouTube channel as well. And if you subscribe to our YouTube channel, you'll get a notification every time we add a video. And please make plans to join Kathy next week when she shares tea with Peyton Pearson. Thank you for everything, and have a happy tea.